All right. Hello, I am Jackson Reyes with Topher Adams. We'll introduce ourselves in a second, but starting off, Topher, is Florida football cooked?
Uh, have they ever been more cooked is the question.
That's I'm not I'm thinking yeah. I'm thinking
Like,
this has to be it. This is the bar. This is the lowest it's been.
look, so I first to admit, only really been a Florida fan since I got to UF like 4 years ago. So I don't have the deep lore of Florida in my bones, but there's no way it's been worse than this, yes?
I would have to agree. So quick introduce to ourselves. I've grown up watching the Florida Gators for my entire life. My dad went there. I went to the University of Florida with Topher. He also went there, and we covered the team. I covered them for about a year, their football team with the Alligator. Topher's covered them for what, 3 or 4 years? Was it three?
Actually,
Yes,
it was
for
four. I did
four.
SB Nation, ITG, then the Alligator.
So we have some extensive knowledge of covering this team and then following this team. And no, this is the worst. I mean, I've watched a 4-8 season, I've watched a 4-7 season, and those felt pretty hopeless. But in the same way, they dealt with so many injuries that 4-8 year. I mean, they were down to like a third string quarterback. Skyler Moore was playing snaps, and it's like if a guy like that, no disrespect to Skyler Moore, I bet he's a great person. But in terms of just him as on the football field, if he's your starter on a Power Five football team, things are not going well. Um, and kind of same with that other 4-7 year. Jim McElwain had kind of lost the plot. It was just sort of a sinking ship already, and at least they didn't start 0-1 and getting pummeled. I don't believe that
No,
four and
like
seven year. But this
the
year,
The
I mean,
worst, the worst part about it is the context, right? Because if you think about the worst years in the last decade, which you're referring to, and even if you want to throw Mullins last year, where they go 6-7, right? The worst years are year like 3 or 4 of an era that was okay, right? They had done some good stuff, New Year's Six, SEC championship game appearances. Like they'd done some good stuff, and then they kind of lost the plot, like you said, and things fell off hard because there's infrastructure issues, there's recruiting issues, whatever the case is. This is year zero mistakes, year zero quality of product in year three. And
and
like
the
we've seen this game 100 times.
and not to interrupt you, but like you talk about how it's year zero mistakes, and the thing is like for better or worse in this era of college football, plenty of other people talked about it. Year zero just doesn't exist anymore. Especially if you're a Power Four coach, uh, coaching at a school like Florida, you don't really get a year zero. It's you have the resources to turn this around now. You need to be turning this around now. And obviously, I believe there should have been some patience year one, obviously, but like it's year three now, and it's nothing looks better. I mean, I guess special teams didn't have some goofy mistake uh that kind of like killed them, but okay, cool, you did the bare minimum of having 11 men on a field goal block, but I mean the offense looked flat, the defense looked terrible, and I'm on record. You can go on my Twitter. I'm a Muschamp truther. I know he had to get fired, but I feel like revisionist history will be much more fonder to him in his Florida tenure. And you look at after that 4-8 year, he still went 7-5 in his last season before he got let go. And he beat Georgia and he almost beat a really good FSU team. Um, so even in like this year where it's like, okay, you have to prove yourself, and he didn't prove himself, he picked up a huge win over Florida's one of Florida's biggest rivals, and he had what would have been the best season if it had been Napier. And so that I don't know, that just things are not going well
The
for them.
the the frustrating thing about Florida football, especially if you go now into like what's next, is that you have two minds where it's like you need to be patient, you need to build. There's a lot of program issues that are front of mind, but at the same time, like Billy Napier's a bad football coach. He's bad at coaching football. He's a good dude. I like his vibe. I'm sure he's a very pleasant person to work with, but he's not good at coaching football. And it's kind of that simple because even with all of Florida's limitations, there's like a base level of competence that this team has not had. in 4 years. And that's just he's just not a good football coach.
I mean,
Will
it's
Muschamp has a lot of issues, but he's a good football coach. Jim McElwain has a lot of issues, but he's a pretty okay football coach. Dan Mullen, a lot of issues, pretty good football coach. Billy's just not a good football coach.
and there's things you could point out with like each of these past Florida coaches where you're like, hey, you know, they didn't work out. I'm not saying like they should bring them back. I'm definitely not going to be one of those guys who's like, we fired Mullen for this. Um, but I mean, you look at Muschamp, they had perennially top 10 defenses. Also was the best recruiter post Urban Meyer. He brought in, I believe, two top three classes. And then, you know, his transition class from Meyer to Muschamp was still top 15. And then he had a top 15 class, maybe even probably top 10 his last season. So transitioning from him to McElwain. So it's like there was no question there. It was just he couldn't coach an offense and he couldn't get the right offensive coordinator. You look at McElwain, he was kind of a Mullen light where it's like, okay, you think he can coach an offense, and then you get to Mullen and you're like, okay, he can't recruit, which is kind of a big deal in college football, but the man can call some plays. But when you can't recruit, that only takes you so far. Um, with Napier, it's like you point to, you know, what is he doing to like give optimism? They started his tenure with an upset over Utah. And then that season was
Downhill
just
ever
the
since.
ultimate roller coaster. I mean, they lost to Vanderbilt towards the end of the season. You get to year two, they make a million special teams mistakes. The team just doesn't look very but good. They lose five straight games, and now they've lost six straight games. They have not won since I believe October 9th. I mean, middle of October in South Carolina. We covered that game for the Alligator, so we got to witness their last one in person. Um, and I mean, it's just I mean, Napier's getting schooled by water bottles in press conferences. All of the Miami players were trolling the recruits. They're telling them to come to Miami. And I mean, from what I've seen, Florida recruits were posting on their story, laughing at Florida. They were cheering for Miami, and I don't blame them. I'm not going to be like, "Wow, how disrespectful!" Like, if I'm a five-star recruit and I'm watching that, I'd probably want to go to Miami too. There's no like what about that game inspired me to be like, I can be the guy to fix Florida football? Because everything about it just looks like a sinking ship almost.
Yeah, I mean, there's been no progress. There's been nothing good, and everything has been embarrassing. And this, more than anything, is what I think is missing from that baseline competence because it's one thing to not be able to compete with Georgia. It's one thing to not be able to compete with LSU or Texas or whatever, but Vanderbilt, but Kentucky can beating you 3, 4 years in a row. South Carolina's a dogfight. Like I saw there's been a lot of good stuff written, but it's at a point now where the Billy Napier era is the Willie Taggart era at Florida State. And that's annoying to admit because it kind of the hope was that he was going to be like Mike Norvell, where it's like slow first year, slow first 2 years, but you start to get the right portal guys, you get the right high school recruiting starts to revamp, and then year three, year four, you start winning 8, 9, 10 games. But it's instead like Willie Taggart, where it's year two, year three, and you're still seeing the stupidest stuff you've ever seen. You're seeing you're a laughing stock, irrelevant program. Um, like is Florida's the worst team in the SEC right now? Week one overreaction, they're the worst team in the SEC.
Good thing Vanderbilt is not on the schedule this year. Thank you, no divisions.
If Florida played Vanderbilt in Nashville this year, I think they would lose.
It's very possible Diego Pavia just hoops on them and goes for like 400 combined yards. But yeah, no, I mean I definitely agree. It's I think something that like, we should talk about, and I guess I'll pose this right now is I think a lot is talked about, returning to the Gator standard. And I think that's sort of changed now. I mean, you know, going from Spurrier and then you kind of had a little dip with Ron Zook, and then back up with Meyer of like the standard is SEC championships and national championships. And now, I mean, I think they've reached a point now where, they've never made the playoffs in this, iteration of college football. They've come close a few times. If the 12-team playoff that we have now existed back then, they certainly would have made it a few times under Mullen and once under Muschamp and maybe once under McElwain. I can't really remember how they were in the rankings during that time. But I mean, we can't change that now. It was a 14 playoff. They weren't good enough. They didn't make it. And looking at it now, they don't look anywhere close to that, even with an expanded playoff. So I don't think, I mean, obviously the standard should be, can we get back to being competitive as a contender? But right now it's, can we get to 8-4? Can the Gators get to, a really good 9-3 season? Maybe, you lose to Georgia, they lose to, say they play Texas Tech or Texas and lose that game and then one other, but then maybe they beat FSU or they pull off another big win somewhere else. Like, I kind of look at them and look at a school like Nebraska. They're on the mind because I'm here in Omaha for work. And, you know, I would say Huskers fans, obviously, they want to return to where they were, which was a team that won national championships and always contended. But, they know that that's like a little bit of ways away. Can they just make a bowl game? Can they
Yeah,
go 8-4? Because they've had what, 5, 6 seasons of
7.
not even making a bowl game, just losing seasons. And now they're in a spot with Matt Rule, who looks like a good coach. Dylan Raiola was promising in his first game, and I mean, he's a exciting 5-star freshman quarterback. And you know, their defense is voice crack. Their defense is good. They look like they could actually do some things this year. And again, no one's saying, okay, oh, are the Huskers going to go 11-1 and make the playoffs this year with this 5-star quarterback? But I mean, 8-4, totally doable. Um, and with Florida, that's just not the case. They
Yeah.
and I mean, there was maybe some optimism that they could go 8-4, even with the, I'm not going to harp on the difficult schedule. It's the SEC. The schedule's hard every year. I'm so tired of hearing about that. Um, but after that game, it's hard to find even 5 wins with if the team plays like this again. I mean, I don't know. Topher, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, to your Nebraska point, I mean, that's what I've been thinking. Because if you think kind of big picture about the downfall of Nebraska football and how it parallels Florida's last 7 years, right? So Bo Pelini was the head coach at Nebraska. He was kind of like Mr. 8-4, Mr. 9-4, right? That's what he was through the end of the Big 12. Like they had a couple of good years, like the Ndamukong Suh year and all that. But like early 2010s, that's where they were as they transitioned to the Big Ten, right? Eventually, they get fed up with the Bo Pelini of it all, let him go, even though I don't even think he had a worse record than 8-4 once in his whole Nebraska tenure. They go to Mike Riley, who starts out that same thing, like 9-4, 8-4 kind of thing. Then they tail off to like 5-7, kind of 500 territory. So they fire him. It's like Scott Frost, you're the guy that gets back the national titles. And the same thing happens. It just gets worse and worse slowly year over year to the point where they're in laughing stock 7 years without a bowl game, nightmare territory. And that's kind of the path Florida's on right now. Um, again, not saying they shouldn't have fired Mullen. That's not the point here, but it's kind of the program malaise and like the general slide of what's happening because Mullen, it's that same thing where he's good but not good enough, and then it kind of tapers off, so you have to fire him. And then you get this new era where you go from not only are you not good enough, you're not even good. You're not even okay. Um, so that's the thing where I don't know. You can't worry when you look about what's next. You can't really worry about becoming a championship team and competing with Georgia, even though that's what every Florida fan wants. You can't really worry about reaching that phase until you have a baseline program competence to be like 8-4 every year. Once you can do that, and I think that honestly is a combination of new coach and just like functional infrastructure, administration wise, roster building wise. Once you have that, then expectation rises and you'd be like, okay, now it's time. We got to turn it around. We got to start making the playoff every year. That's where that comes in. And I think literally everything has to change, and we can get to that bit of it, but it really has to come with the a rationalization of accepting the steps of progress the same way we kind of look at the steps of decline.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the point. I mean, Florida under Napier, and I mean, this first year of what I'm the stat I'm about to rattle off is Mullins last year. But I mean, the fact that it's continued under Napier is still a massive point where, I mean, it's historically bad. I mean, they had three consecutive losing seasons after last year's 5-7, and that hasn't happened since the 50s. And then I looked it up. If they have four consecutive losing seasons with this season, the last time that happened was 1935 to 1938. So we're talking pre-World War II bad. And you look at like so many games where they just keep making history in the worst ways possible. Last year, we covered that LSU game when they went to Baton Rouge. That was the most yards they'd ever given up as a defense. And of course, Jaden Daniels won the Heisman. He's a really good quarterback. But if you're Florida, you got to have some pride. I mean, you can't give up. I think they gave up over 600 total yards. Jaden Daniels just absolutely torched that defense. Um, and the game was honestly a little competitive for a while until it just slipped away from him because he just kept scoring every single time, and Florida just couldn't keep up. And then you look at the game on Saturday, 41 points is the most ever given up in the Swamp. I can't remember if it was in a season opener or just in general. Either way, that's not good. I mean, you know, getting blown out like that in a season opener, maybe Miami is much better than I thought they'd be, and that probably is the case. Um,
It does, but it
but
doesn't
yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean,
because it's not even about winning or losing that game. It's like a level of pride and a level of functionality. Like
exactly.
if Florida lost that game 27-24 or 28-21, we'd be disappointed, but I think we'd feel good about the state of the program overall.
True. And I mean that was the thing. I mean, so many people, I feel like a big talking point was like, which coach is going to get put on the hot seat after they lose this game? And, my point was before the game, it was I don't think if Napier loses this game, he's on the hot seat. I mean, obviously if things continue to be bad and he continues to lose, like yes, questions need to be asked, but like one game, especially against an in-state rival who looks to be much better, if you lose 27-24, you're fine. you know, go.
But
There's plenty
like,
of other games to win, but
yeah,
they played in such a way where it's like, okay, how can we get on the hot seat as quick as possible from a season?
that's what it was. Like I was in that same boat where I understand the length and depth of the rebuild and how they're trying to build every infrastructure bit, and it's a slow build, and I get all that and patience, and the schedule is going to be hard. Like I wasn't a guy that said fire him if they go 6-6, 7-5. I understand that. But you can have an okay record if you show signs of progress. There has been zero signs of progress in his what 27 games as head coach. Like I don't think there's a single thing they do better. I think there's a lot of things that they do worse. Um, and I've been thinking this weekend, like how bad is Billy Napier's record as the head coach of the University of Florida if Anthony Richardson had transferred to like Ole Miss or whatever, and they had a different quarterback that first year, they probably go what, like 4-8?
Probably.
And then the
I
next year
mean,
it's like 5-7, 4-8.
because like if AR leaves and he's not there at year one of Napier, they don't beat Utah week one.
Nope.
Like that game,
It was the Anthony Richardson show.
yeah. To talk about overreaction the other way, AR looked like he was going to be the runaway Heisman. And Florida actually looked like they were like could be like a 10-2 team because it's like okay, you have the most like freak alien quarterback in college football. He's gonna do things that are gonna beat like I mean, you don't know for sure, but it's like if he plays like this every game, who's to say he can't go like alien mode against Georgia? Who's to say he can't go alien mode against FSU or LSU? Like obviously they didn't win those games. But because we saw how the season ended up turning out, but just from that week one sample size, it looked like the team was gonna be kind of special. Um, and then obviously it fell apart, and it just seems like they've gotten worse each year. Because I mean, you look at that year one, they lost some head scratching games, the Vanderbilt one in particular, but like a lot of coaches have lost year one head scratching games. I mean, it was an entirely different era, but Saban lost to what, Louisiana Monroe in his year one. Kirby Smart lost to a not very good South Carolina team in his year one. So it's not to say you can't lose some weird games in year one and not get better. But I think then it was like, okay, you
They
had a
never got
really
better.
weird, yeah, you had a really up and down year one. Time to take that and make the improvements. And it just got worse. I mean, Florida doesn't beat their rivals. They keep making history in all the wrong ways. I mean, I have some stats pulled up. If you look at that season one from QB play, there's a graph by CFB numbers, and it basically charts your PFF grade and your ESPN QBR. Uh, thank God for Donovan Smith at Houston and Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, or else Graham Mertz would be the worst quarterback from week one. I mean, he had his worst game as a Gator. And some of that is on him. I'm not going to defend Graham Mertz and say, oh, well, it was all the other external factors. But it certainly didn't help him that the play calling was very unimaginative. Unimaginative. They did not really take advantage of the middle of the field passing game. It was a lot of can we try and stretch the field downfield, and Graham Mertz just couldn't hit those throws. And then, looking at the offensive line, this is PFF. Cam Waits had 19 pass blocking reps, and he had a pass blocking grade of 0. He allowed 4 pressures, and flip side, offense or defensive front, they had 19 pressures against Miami, according to PFF. And watching that game, it did not feel like they had 19
No,
pressures. They had one sack late. I think it was Tyreek Sapp. But other than that, I mean, uh, what's their quarterback? Why did his name just slip my brain?
Cam Ward.
Cam Ward. He looked like he was. I mean, he was just like walking out there. Like he would start scrambling, and he looked like he was like walking for 20 yards,
Yeah.
which was
And, and
ridiculous.
you want to talk just kind of base level, like a sense of pride. Like Miami was disrespectful to Florida. Complimentary. They were very disrespectful. And Florida did nothing to stop that. And like if you want to talk about from a Miami perspective, like that's Miami doing what they want as a culture, is being nasty, being cocky, being swaggy. And Florida just had no willpower to or ability to do anything about it. Like a guy literally walking out of bounds 15 yards downfield because no one's gonna hustle play to make a tackle, or casually just strolling to his left and firing stupid, sidearm balls across the middle of the field and it working more often than not. Like there's no pride, there's no fire. Um, and the funny thing is I'm used to Florida defenses from like 2019, 2017, like that era of Florida football. They were so fast and so aggressive on defense, like the whole time I grew up watching college football. And that's just not there anymore. They're so timid, they're so soft. Like outside of the two linebackers, is there anybody on that defense that played with any amount of fire at any time?
I'll give a shout out to Asa Turner. He got absolutely. I don't know the extent of his injury he had when Xavier Restrepo hit a spin move and he just literally hit the ground. But I mean, to show that much effort to try and stop the spin move that you get hurt, I'll give him some credit there. I also just feel a little bad. But no, to your point, no, it was just all around. Just they got beat up, they got bullied, and I think that was the clear show of another fall of Napier. I remember a couple weeks ago I read an athletic story on the athletic, and it was a mailbag about someone asking, does Florida need to realize that it's not like a place where recruits want to go anymore? And in some ways I think that could be a little true. In other ways, I don't think so because I mean when Florida was 5-2 last year, they had a top five recruiting class. And sure, maybe some of those guys still flip, but if they pulled out like an eight and
It's
four
it's the
season,
record.
it's a top. I'd
Yeah.
say there's no way it doesn't slip out of the top 10, which is what happened because they lost 5 straight games and a lot of guys flipped because you see the on-field product and why would you want to play for a school like that?
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at Miami, they've also not been great prior to I think they'll be good this year. They look good week one. Um, but they've still been able to land a bunch of high level recruits.
High school and
And
portal.
you look at that, and I mean that showed Saturday of just so many guys who were down to two schools. They were down to Miami and they were down to Florida, and they picked Miami almost every single time. And those guys reared their head. I mean, the offensive line of Miami had some guys who almost went to Florida. They kept Cam Ward protected. Florida's pressure, they got 19 pressures according to PFF, but they got one sack and they just did not affect Cam Ward like at all. Uh, Guys like I'm not even gonna try and pronounce his last name. I know I'm gonna butcher this, but Francisco Magoa uh was great on Miami's defense. He was a guy who almost went to Florida. Mark Fletcher, who's now the second string running back because Damian Martinez is a beast. He was a guy who almost went to Florida and he went to Miami. And again, I don't know how close these recruiting battles really were because I can't go behind the scenes of what's in these high school kids' heads or like going behind the scenes of these recruiting battles of like what's going on with the coaches. But I mean, all I can see is that when these guys post their graphics, when these guys are at the table with all the hats, Florida and Miami are right next to each other. And from what I hear,
Yeah.
it's those two schools, and these guys want to go to Miami. And that was a clear result of Saturday. To quote Jesse Palmer, every single time I blow out a team on EACFB, it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmies and Joes. Certainly the play calling was definitely better. I rewatched that Florida Miami game and there was just no creativity with the offensive play calling. But it goes to show also where, I mean, that's not just a play calling. That's just a clear talent gap.
And kind of to round out this point before I have some takes about what's next, because oh boy, I got a take cooking
Yeah.
about what's next. The recruiting losses, which then manifest in the on-field stuff, but the on-field stuff, again, take for the future. Just hold on a minute. To sum up recruiting, to your point, Miami winning all these battles and the decline of last year's recruiting class, it's two baskets. One is like NIL infrastructure program stuff, recruiting losses. And the second one is like program momentum, being a good football team that players want to be a part of, program losses. I think some of the guys that flipped, like the kids who went to Auburn specifically, like those kind of losses, that's a lot of like the NIL recruiting off-field stuff, just kind of getting body bagged by Ole Miss or and Auburn's collectives and kind of the Hugh Freeze of it all. Those are just, off-field things that the program has to do better at. But then to your point, like people like Florida. Like there's a lot of kids in Florida, in Georgia, in Alabama, that like Florida. They have good facilities, they have a good stadium, it's a good school. Like Florida as an entity divorced from all context is an attractive place for a top recruit. But when you know you only get 4 years, what is the point of hooking yourself to a sinking ship? Like,
Exactly.
why would you do that?
Because I mean the case is it's clear. I mean, Florida it's not just Napier. It's top to bottom. The whole administration just kind of is not in a good space because you look at how much money they bring in, you look at how big their donor base is compared to a school like Ole Miss. They should not be losing players to Ole Miss. I mean, that school has had really good on-field success, so obviously that is a factor. But in terms of like their resources, they're towards the very bottom of the SEC. I mean, the Mississippi schools, I'm not to have Mississippi State catch a stray here, but like, I mean, they're two of the lowest in the conference in terms of what they bring in and what their donor base is. And that's just kind of a fact. I mean, the numbers all back that up.
Yeah.
And obviously Georgia and Bama are going to kind of get the guys that they want. But when you're in the most talent rich part of the country with you're in Florida, Georgia's next door, and Alabama's next door. That's outside of like Texas and California, like those are the three most talent rich states in terms of high school recruits. Like, so there's no reason why you should be losing so many 50-50 battles to Florida State and Miami and Auburn, who are three schools that are at some level kind of equal footing as you. Obviously, those schools outside of Auburn have had some little more success than you in recent years, but I mean, there's no reason. But I mean, everything has sort of culminated to this point. And the fact that's coming to this point kind of segues into the next point that you brought up of
Yeah.
what's next? What is the
Yeah.
future of
All
Florida
right.
football?
So it's not a simple plan. It's not an easy plan, and it's definitely not a cheap plan. But I can sum it down to three simple steps. We'll go step by step. I think you'll agree with all these.
Okay.
Step one, fire Scott Strickland.
Yes.
I think we can. I know the university is in a lot of turmoil, just kind of big picture. Shout out the Alligator for
Yeah,
that
shout out
one.
the Alligator. Thank you for the Ben Sass coverage.
Um, but like Scott Strickland is very bad at his job. I know they've done good with facilities, new baseball stadium, new football building, um, stuff like that. He is very bad at his job of keeping Florida athletics relevant, hiring good coaches, having good, healthy cultures. He's had two major scandals with culture issues. He's had to fire two football coaches, about to be a third football coach, unless Billy Napier magically becomes God when his back's against the wall.
Yeah.
Most sports are kind of underperforming
Yeah. I
relative
mean,
to Florida expectations.
you look at the best sports in Florida, they were coaches that were not hired by Strickland.
Yeah, it's
Baseball went to the
still
College
it's
World Series pre Strickland. Gymnastics is always really good pre Strickland. Golf won a natty two
pretty
years
strict.
ago, a year
Uh,
ago, and that
Deacon
was pre
might have
Strickland.
been
No, I
Strickland, but
checked it. He
Deacon
was pre
still
Strickland.
that's one.
He was pre Strickland.
Okay,
Track
there
and
you go.
field was pre Strickland. Swimming was pre Strickland. Their golf team is, or not their, sorry, their tennis team. They've kind of taken a dip and they just hired a coach with Strickland. Soccer is kind of maybe they're on the way up. That was Strickland. So obviously, I mean, with the athletic department, football is always going to be the top thing, just because that is what brings in money to the program. But just as a whole, like your job is still being successful. I mean, Florida tries to moniker the term everything school. And for a time, that was certainly true. And they're certainly still very successful at a lot of sports. The thing is, those sports were just, they still have coaching and infrastructure that came before Strickland was the AD. Basketball is really the only sport where Strickland can maybe say he's turned a page, but we'll still wait and see. I'm
Yeah,
optimistic and confident in the basketball program. I like Todd Golden as coach, but I mean, year one they missed the tournament. Year two they got bounced in the first round.
yeah.
So I mean,
So, but to a football centric perspective, fire two coaches, and the third make or break coach is a total disaster. So Scott
yes.
Strickland has to go, have to move on. So that's step one. Step two is you kind of have to embrace what's next. So from all reporting I hear, things you read, things you hear, Florida is behind the times in how to utilize and weaponize its resources. Um, a lot of really good columns about how behind the times Florida is with like spending all this money on a big staff as opposed to putting it all into the roster or worrying about new stadium renovations instead of paying in the transfer portal, right? So I don't know what it looks like administratively or culturally, but there has to be a program shift to kind of embrace the modern era of college football for better and worse. Um, and I think that's the biggest thing about a new athletic director. It's just new, fresh perspective, new, fresh voice, and how things have to operate, how things have to go. Just bring in fresh voices to the UAA, to the collective, to the football operations kind of area. Um, I
I mean,
think that kind of
they
sets
need to
the
hire a
groundwork.
GM,
Yes,
I
that's
think.
a big
I
part of
don't know
that.
if they currently have one. I don't think they do, but I mean, that's so many of these successful football teams now. They have a
And
GM of sorts.
someone wrote that. I don't know whose column I was reading or whose Twitter I was reading where they said that, but that's the point. That's kind of embracing that new era is getting the infrastructure, the correct infrastructure. Florida has a lot of infrastructure, but I don't think they have the correct infrastructure. Clearly, they don't have the right you like they have 100 coaches and none of them are doing a job. So,
Yeah. It's definitely quantity over quality right now.
exactly.
I mean, the thing is like I think the biggest tell is like you should want your coordinators and assistant coaches to like leave. Like I don't mean that like you should want them to like not want to work here
But you want
anymore,
them to
but
get bigger jobs.
yeah, I mean there's a reason. I mean, Nick Saban, Billy Napier's literally a part of the Saban tree. And they've churned out so many coaches. And, how they succeed after that they leave your school, whatever, man. They can do whatever. They could be Kirby Smart from the Saban tree. They can be what Napier is now. But the fact of the matter is, your school is producing head coaches at P4 programs. You look at Kirby Smart's doing it now. I mean, their defensive backs coach is the head coach of Syracuse now. And like, if if somebody hired Florida's DB coach, you'd be like, what are they doing? But Syracuse hires Georgia's DB coach, and you're like, okay, let's. I think this could work out. Let's see how it goes because like he coached an incredible secondary, and he clearly knows how to recruit guys. Um, and so you kind of want your coordinators to leave and get jobs and expand your coaching tree because then that just shows, hey, come here and be a coordinator, and you're gonna get a job elsewhere. Because these guys don't become coordinators just to be like, oh, I want to be a lifelong coordinator. On the off chance, there's rare cases they do, but more often than not, it's going up the ladder to be a head coach. Is Florida a place where I can go and do that? And right now, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, and nothing they've done structurally is putting good people in good places. It's not working out. So we've fired Scott Strickland and cleaned house pretty much in UAA, cleaning up that whole mess, right? Embracing what's next, GM, utilizing the NIL resources. Because people talk about Florida not having money. I don't think that's the case. I think to your point, I think Florida has the ability to have a lot of money. They just don't know how to spend it on the roster. So we're doing all those things now. Step three is to borrow the parlance of the wonderful split zone duo. They need a fucking football coach. They need a proper certified FFC, a guy who has won football games and a lot of football games, preferably at different places with different circumstances. And I'm not worried about fit. I'm not worried about culture. I'm not worried about recruiting. I'm not worried about anything except is this guy someone who wins football games consistently in college football? And that's why there's really one name that I think is both realistic and correct. And do you know who that name is?
I mean, I have a name,
I like
and
your name too, but do you know who the FFC that Florida needs is?
I don't know who are you gonna say.
It is one Mr. Lance Leipold from
Okay,
Kansas
I like it. I
University.
like it. I like it. He's someone who I was looking at. My name, drum roll, Lane Kiffin, Lane Train, um, and no, I like both those guys. Let's start with your guy. Let's start with Lance Leipold.
Yeah,
Make the
so
case. I
here's the
definitely
thing.
agree. So I just
Here's the thing about Lance Leipold, and like there are sexier names. Lane Kiffin would be very exciting, probably be very good, and I'd be over the moon excited about that. But I want a guy who just knows how to make a football team play good football and win games. This guy, multiple time national champion at D3 level in Wisconsin, made Buffalo, who sucks, one of the best teams in the MAC for multiple years.
yeah, he was a
And he
miracle
has turned
worker there.
Kansas into a legitimate ranked team.
Second miracle.
Like that, that is impossible. Kansas was so unbelievably, ungodly, unfathomably bad in the 2010s to the point where it was a literal joke. And they are ranked, and that's just like, yeah, that's fine. That's normal. What's
Yeah.
wrong with that? And I don't know, and I really don't care the ceiling. I don't care how good of a recruiter he is. I don't care how he compares to Kirby Smart or Nick Saban or anything. I care that he will make football players play football good. And Florida will be a more functional football team when they actually go between the lines. And I think if you partner a guy like that with competent infrastructure, good GM, good NIL, then he can just worry about making football players good between the lines and having a good culture. And the GM and the infrastructure and the fact that it's the University of Florida with lots of money can handle a lot of the recruiting stuff.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, again, you say the thing where it's like, I don't know how he'll be in some of the other aspects, but he can definitely coach players. I think at the end of the day, if you can win games at Buffalo and Kansas, you're clearly recruiting to a level that's good enough to win there. Because like half the battle is obviously getting them to play good football, but the other half the battle is you can only get certain players to play so good. He's clearly bringing in guys who are good at what they do, and he's able to bring the best out of them. Um, and so, like you said, with the infrastructure at Florida, if it's right, I think he can take advantage of that. Because I mean, if you show that you've won ball games everywhere you've gone, then like you tell that to recruits, you bring in a little back up the Brinks trunk if you have the NIL money, which again, like I can't look into the behind the scenes of Florida's financial situation in terms of that and sort of their NIL collectives and that sort. But like I refuse to believe that like they're just like broke. I mean, they have one of the largest alumni bases in the country, and they have one of the some of like the biggest donors in the country. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be Texas and Texas A&M where you're kind of just printing out money at will, but there's no reason that like Florida's NIL collective should have to be in dogfights with like the Mississippi schools again, not to sorry, Mississippi State for catching a stray. Or Missouri or Arkansas. I know Arkansas is the Tyson chicken dynasty right now, but like still. Um, and so I think Lance Leipold's a guy who he just knows how to win. He's done it. And it's not a thing where he's only done it at the MAC. He went to Kansas, a team that perennially has won like 2, 3 games a year. I mean, you look at that program, Les Miles was at Kansas, and it was a disaster. Say what you will about Les Miles. I know his end of LSU tenure was not great, but he was still winning like 9 games a year, like floor. They won a national championship under him. You'd think he'd be a good enough coach to at least get Kansas to like a 6-6 year. And to my knowledge, that just never happened. And they were just really bad. And then Lance Leipold comes in, and all of a sudden, like, you're like, wait, are they a dark horse for the 12 team playoff? Are they a dark horse to win the Big 12? Like, if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, sure, why not? Have him play in the Big 12 conference championship, you know? I mean, OU and Texas are gone. That conference is I don't know. I have no idea what to think of that conference. Um, so yeah, I definitely like that guy a lot.
All right, I don't need to be sold on Lane because again, I love Lane, but I want to hear the rationale before we counterpoint it because I have some drawbacks to Lane, but I want to hear the main selling point.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what you said, I mean, he's definitely had some weird stops along the way, but the guy knows how to win football games. I mean, he went to FAU, which I thought was pretty smart to like kind of just rehab his image a little bit, and he won a lot of games there. He turned FAU into a competitive program, which is kind of insane. I mean, Willie Taggart was there, I believe, and that was rough. And Tom Herman's there now, and I think Tom Herman is a good football coach, and FAU we'll wait and see, but I don't know how good they'll be. Um, and then he goes to Ole Miss, and like I said, look, Ole Miss historically has not been a very good SEC program, and resource wise, they're much better now, and they definitely have really worked up their NIL collectives. I mean, you just see that with how they work in the transfer portal, but like he is able to like they're so much better than they should be. And they get players who are so much better than the players you normally would expect to go to Ole Miss, which is kind of crazy. And that's one aspect. The other aspect is he clearly knows how to work in this era. Um, you look at the guys they brought on the transfer portal, they took Florida's best defender, Prince Umanmielen. They brought in a bunch of top guys, a bunch of dudes who were former blue chip recruits. Um, and he runs a scheme that is very quarterback friendly, that is very much just kind of add water, add quarterback, you get a good offense. They know how to score points, um, which I think is so important. It's unfortunate because I do miss the days of like top five defenses under Muschamp, but I think in this era of college football, that's just so hard to have unless you just have dudes at every single position. Like if you're Georgia, you're gonna have a good defense because you have NFL draft prospects too deep at every position. But that's just kind of hard to do. And if Florida even reached a point like that, it would still be like a long ways away. I think the point of the matter is, can you score a lot of points, and can you at least have a competent defense? Can you have a defense that at least knows what it's doing, and but maybe doesn't get a stop every single time? Um, because I mean, sometimes you're just gonna get in a dogfight. And can you win that dogfight? And like, they beat LSU last year. When a lot of people did not expect them to win that game. How many games did they win last year? 11, right? Because they beat Penn
Something like that.
State. I think they beat,
They've won a ton of games the last 3 years.
yeah. And that's one of the things where it's like, hey, they struggled a little bit against teams when they had to play the big games with like Georgia and Bama, they lost. But look, like we've been talking about, I try to be realist about this. I know they're a ways away of closing the gap on the Bulldogs. I'm not asking for them to beat them year one. I'm asking to go 8-4, 9-3, at least beat like one or two of the teams that people don't really think about you to be on your schedule. I mean, they used to I like watching Florida all these years. Tennessee and Kentucky used to be just circle, pencil in to your two SEC wins every year. Even in the worst years, the 4-8 year and the 4-7 year, they beat Tennessee and Kentucky both of those times. And obviously, those are programs are in different spots now. I'm not saying they should forever just be worse than Florida, but there are programs that you just should be better than, or at least consistently beat rather than losing three straight to Kentucky. Um, so that is my case for Lane Kiffin, but I know you have some counterpoints.
Yeah, so I mean, first, I love Lane Kiffin. He's super fun. The kind of add water element to his offense, I think, is very true. And the other exciting thing is it kind of recruits itself in a lot of ways. If you, especially in the transfer portal, in high school, like a lot of the other stuff matters in recruiting, but in transfer portal, it's really money and playing for a competitive team with a good system. Um, and I think Lane Kiffin would be an immediate boon to recruiting, especially at the transfer portal level. Um, and you imagine like DJ Lagway. I feel like he's one of the few coaches who would almost certainly be able to keep Lagway because why would you not want to play for Lane Kiffin offense, right? Um, the other thing about him, Lane Kiffin, is that there's a chance he's just kind of Dan Mullen too. Obviously, they're different people, different offense, but also not really that different. What's the difference between it being just another 9, 10 wins a season, great offense, inconsistent defense, recruiting not quite up to the Georgia, Alabama level. Like that's probably what would end up happening a lot of times with Lane Kiffin. I think the difference is, and why I'm more pro Lane, um, is that like to your point, it's the 12 team era. Those good Mullen teams would have been playoff teams. And you get into a playoff situation with SEC athletes and a good quarterback, you really don't know. And maybe you never really get past and it gets frustrating. You get to year 6 of Lane Kiffin, you're like, okay, when are we going to win the big one? But hell, at this point, that sounds pretty good. That sounds like a pretty good outcome to me. So yeah, the actual big issue with Lane, because honestly, I don't think anything I've said is actually a demerit. It's more just a context. Um, the issue is money and where he's at right now. He's got a great thing going for him. Everyone jokes that Mark Stoops has the best job in the world because he can go 7-5 and get a 4-year extension. Lane Kiffin's in a very similar boat where he can go 9-3 every year and they think he's God. And he's getting paid like $10 million a season and he's got good collective infrastructure to go out and try and win. Um, if you're Florida, you're just kind of hoping one, you have the money, which with how expensive Napier's buyout would be, could get scary. Could get a little frisky with the finances. Um, and two, just like, does he want the pressure cooker? Like, I just don't know how he's wired. Maybe he does. Maybe he wants the smoke. Maybe he wants a program that has a more realistic national title hope. Or maybe, he wins the title at Ole Miss this year and he's like, no, I'm fine. I'm chilling. That's kind of the thing is like, how attainable is he? Which is crazy to think, but that's kind of where we're at with that.
Yeah, that's what I think the biggest thing for that is. I mean, all of it I think really matters on how much he wants the pressure because that is the biggest factor. But let's say he does. That's kind of when we need to look into the peep behind the curtain of like what is Florida's financial situation. If it's as bad as we think it is, then that'll be definitely tough. But if they're actually just doing fine, and it's more so a matter of they just don't have people who are properly running this, then I don't see that as much of an issue. Obviously, on field and infrastructure, Ole Miss is doing very well, but I don't see a world where if Florida just drops like the God bag on them, I don't see a world where Ole Miss matches that. And because like I said, you look at the things like they have a smaller stadium, they don't compete in ticket sales. They're not in a much relevance. They're not in a as a relevant location as Florida, so they don't compete in terms of revenue brought in. Um, and you look at their alumni base, it's bigger. So they bring in more NIL funds simply through that if the people are actually donating NIL funds, which that's a question mark. I don't want to guarantee it and just assume that that's just the case. But you would think it is. But again, we don't see those finances behind the scenes. Um, so I think it's a matter of like I think that's a very valid point of does he want this? And if they want a natty, then like it kind of changes everything though. I don't think that'll happen. Um, with this Ole Miss team. I think they'll be very good, but I don't know.
No, I mean,
And
I don't think they will either, but it's the playoff.
yeah,
Honestly, the playoff portal era kind of with Michigan winning the title last year, my perception of who can win a national championship is so different than it was 3 years ago. So I'm not going to rule it out until it doesn't happen.
that's true. That's very fair. Um, but I just look at like some of the external factors like that, where if Florida's finances are better than we think it is, and they can just have the money and kind of just throw it around the kind of the way that Texas A&M does, I don't see why they couldn't just, you know, back up the Brinks truck for Lane Kiffin. And again, I don't see how Ole Miss matches that, and then I don't see how Lane would say no to that unless he didn't want the pressure that the Florida job would bring. Because obviously it would be a very high pressure job. Um, which is why they've kind of struggled to bring some guys into the
For sure.
program. But yeah, I think
I
those are two guys.
I have I have one more. I know doing a deep hot board dive when the coach is actively speaking at media and is still employed with a $26 million buyout is kind of cart before horse, but there's one more that I'd be
It's what we're
remiss
here to
not
do. That's what we're here to do.
there's one more I'd be remiss not to say because he's one of my favorite coaches in the country, has been for a long time. And before I say him, the caveat, I need to contrast him to Billy first. So Billy, the reason you got him was because he's a Saban guy, methodical program builder, recruiter. It has nothing, it really didn't have anything to do with his X's and O's or his ability to coach up football players. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
We did not talk about Billy Napier, the football coach. We talked about Billy Napier, the program builder. And now we see he can't coach football, and that's a real problem.
He also can't really program build,
He can't
which
do
is
that either, so I'm not
also an
really sure
issue.
what he does well. So let's say you don't want to go Lance Leipold because you're dumb, or he says no because he's a Midwest guy. You don't know. Let's say Lane Kiffin is too expensive. The budget option, but the awesome option. Do you know where I'm going with this?
I have an idea, but I don't know for sure. I'm gonna let
So
you.
it is my guy. We need to save him from hell, Mr.
Oh,
Jamie
Jamie
Chadwell.
Chadwell. That's who I thought you were going. That's where I thought you were going with it. Let's go.
I adore Jamie Chadwell. I think he's a lot of fun. I think he is a good football coach. As an offensive mind, he's very creative. He makes his quarterbacks very good. Um, Look how bad Grayson McCall has been post Jamie Chadwell. That's all you need to say about
I'll
that,
say
man.
I was watching that Western Carolina game. Ooh, oh, I
Look,
regret picking NC State to win 10 games. I'll wear that on my chest.
I don't know if Jamie Chadwell would be a good P4 and certainly a high P4 head coach. No idea. It's kind of a risk, but he's a good football coach. He wins football games. And like he's fun. I need fun. This is like to me, this is like Lane Kiffin light. You can't afford Lane, so it's Jamie Chadwell it is champ. Um, it'd be exciting. That style of offense, that kind of energy, because it's so glib right now. It's so dismal. It's so boring. They're not fun bad. They're not exciting good. They're just boring. And the best version of the Napier era was always going to be boring. And that sucks. So Jamie Chadwell will be extremely exciting, extremely fun. Um, Plus, the spread option is why the Urban Meyer era was so exciting. Bring the spread option back. I love Jamie Chadwell. That's my soapbox.
I mean, he's certainly a guy who I think could keep DJ. Because I mean, DJ Lagway and a Jamie Chadwell offense.
Would be
That gets me
awesome.
excited. That makes me happy inside. Um, there's definitely some clear like I don't know less criticisms, but just reasons for concern. I mean, he was really successful at Coastal, but you kind of look at it where like maybe we over overestimated Billy because he succeeded at Louisiana, but the thing about that school is the gap of their resources between the rest of the Sun Belt's kind of like this. Whereas the SEC, you're kind of here with everybody. Like I've said all the stuff about Ole Miss, but like I'm talking like Ole Miss and Florida's like this, but it's really like this. So it's like that margin for error is really not that much. In terms of just resources, I'm not saying on field success because obviously Ole Miss is much better there. And Liberty's kind of the same way where you look at Liberty. And honestly, if anything, Liberty's more like here and the rest of CUSA is like here. That is a bad conference. And I think Liberty is a good football team because I think Jamie Tidwell is a good coach. But in terms of just like the fan base as a whole, watching them bring in a guy like that, and in that aspect alone, I think he's a much more fun coach. I think he could probably win more games than Billy, but in that aspect alone, he is very much similar to Napier.
Yeah.
Um, but other than that, I think he would be very fun. I think he could win some fun football games. They'd at least be more exciting to watch. Um, I think I think in any case, if he didn't work out, it wouldn't look like this where Florida's losing 41-17 at home. I think it would kind of look like it would be a lot of kind of how Florida LSU went last year. I think it could be a lot of that where it's like, okay, you lost, but you scored 42 points. Okay, you lost. You lost 60-50. Um,
Yeah. And
which
I don't like obviously the end goal is to be like championship caliber team, but goddamn man, I just want to be fun. I want to enjoy watching Florida football on Saturday.
I agree because Saturday was not fun to watch. It felt over from the jump. Um, and again, I like I said, I went back and I charted Florida's offense. I kind of skipped over some of the third quarter when it was just 38-10 and over. And I'm not going to read out every single play, but it just like you look at the drive and you're like they stalled out from trying to run it and then a jet sweep on the first drive. And then they get something kind of going on the second drive and then incomplete 3 yard run, 1 yard check down. And then just kind of going the rest of the game outside of the 71-yard Montreal run, it all just kind of looked like that. They couldn't push the ball downfield. They didn't want to take advantage of the middle of the field. Their run game couldn't get going outside of 2 good Montreal runs. They kept trying it. They tried to get Trey Wilson in space on screens and jet sweeps. He couldn't do anything because the guys couldn't block and he was like swallowed up immediately. You get to and I guess the way we'll close this out of, we've talked some coaches, we've talked how to fix this program. But as of today, Monday, September 2nd, Billy Napier is still the head coach. Scott Strickland is still the AD, and things are still the same way that it was on Saturday. Um, and obviously, I think we could be heading towards some changes very soon. I would hope so, at least. But as of now, as things are, what reason for optimism is left for Florida football this year is, I guess, how I'll close it. So, Topher, I'll throw it to you. With how things are right now, this very second, what is the reason for optimism? I know it's hard, but try and find one.
Uh, let's all right, I'm gonna take the easy one and say DJ Lagway. Um, when you watch him, he's got it. Don't know what he'll end up being. Certainly don't know what he is this year, but he's got it. He has the actual tools. The ball comes off of his hand differently. He moves differently. He's what it looks like, right? And even if he ends up, whether he ends up starting the rest of the season or he plays intermittently, getting to see glimmers of him will be exciting and be fun. And, maybe this is just the prelude for Texas A&M legend DJ Lagway.
I
Um,
hope not.
I really hope not, but like whatever. For the time being, DJ Lagway is the future of Florida, and it is exciting when he's on the field, and it makes you feel something because he's what Florida has had at quarterback at times. He's another guy like AR. He's another guy like Tebow, where it's just you can't not watch him. Um, and having someone like that in such a dark moment is extremely exciting. And boy, wouldn't it be cool if he was the guy that wrote the ship, and in 2 years he's the one that led him to the playoff.
It'd be great. And I mean, I guess we could just talk about DJ a little bit because, I'll try and think of a separate point from you, but I mean, DJ is sort of the main reason for optimism. And I mean, looking at this game, their best drive came under DJ. And I think this serves to a bigger point of Napier and what he tries to do as a play caller, which is so funny. So like this was Lagway's second drive of the game. Starts out uh Trey Wilson runs a slant, 11-yard completion. Second play, same exact thing. He runs a slant from the other side of the field, 16-yard completion. Then Lagway keeper. Then a couple plays, they have a successful run. On the seventh play of the drive, Lagway drops back, doesn't see anybody. He's a dual threat guy. He's got some speed. He's athletic. He runs for 16 yards and it's first and goal. And then 2 plays later, they score on a 1-yard touchdown. Um, and I just look at that, and I think the biggest thing for Napier is I think he just tries to overcomplicate his play calling. I think he tries to overcomplicate the routes the receivers run. And Mertz had a couple of completions that were like pretty good early in the game, but I think the thing is like the most successful drive came from 2 slants. And like, yes, you can run really complicated and really like awesome play calling that's like complex and like fun to study. And it's like this is the future of college football. But at the end of the day, it's 18 and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds playing college football, and they're gonna make silly mistakes. And sometimes you can just do the simple stuff and beat other college kids playing football. Um, and that worked. I mean, Trey Wilson is very athletic. He's very fast. DJ Lagway has a very fast arm, and they got 2 first downs off of 2 slants. And I mean, for all that's said about Tebow, this is not me undermining arguably the greatest college football player of all time. If you go back and watch Tebow's games, it's not like they were running the most insane offense ever. Like
Super simple.
Tebow was kind of doing just like the simple stuff. But the reason that he's considered the GOAT by so many is that he was awesome at the simple stuff. I'm not saying that there wasn't any complex or like complicated schemes in the Urban Meyer offense. It's clearly not the case, but it's like, keep it simple, stupid, man. And that'll work more often than not sometimes. So, that's kind of what I have to say about DJ. He's a main point. I'd say my reason for optimism, um, it's hard to find many. I'm gonna say Jordan Howard. I'm excited by him. I'm excited by Pup. I think he's a good linebacker, and the linebackers are certainly the best part of the defense. Um, so if he stays in Florida, if Napier goes and whoever they bring in and he stays, I think he has a chance to be a core piece of that defense. Because I believe he's only a sophomore. Um, Transfer from South Carolina. Um, so I'm excited about him. I think pessimistically, the other source of optimism is uh kind of tailing it around with the narrative of the summer. The schedule is very hard. It's very hard. The FPI updated like win percentages came out, and Florida's only favored to win Samford next week. And other than that, I think their closest FPI percentage is like a 44% chance to beat Mississippi State.
Oh God.
Um, they have like a 40% chance to beat UCF. And
Oh
then after
God.
that, it kind of just curtails from there. Uh, so I'd say my optimism point of optimism as a pessimist is that they probably won't win a lot of football games, which will get Florida closer to having to make a decision, not just on Napier, but from the top of what are we even doing as an athletic department outside of just football. Um, because if the schedule was easier, you could look at that 41-17 loss, shrug it off, and then you go play. I mean, I know Vanderbilt looked good, but it's like, hey, you go play Vanderbilt, you go play South Carolina, who got in a dogfight with Tennessee. You get Kentucky at home. You get UCF at home, and you could still maybe talk yourself into like 7 wins.
Yeah. And so the
But that's not the
schedule,
case.
to your point, the schedule is exciting because there's two outcomes, one likely, one unlikely. One, the schedule is so hard that it becomes an embarrassment and they have to embrace change. Everything has to change. They'll be unavoidable. You got to clean house everywhere. This is just can't happen. Wouldn't be fun to witness, but at least it means the future's better, right? The other mystery box upside is like, what if we're wrong? It's only week one. Who really knows? We've seen bad week ones before turn into good teams. What if Florida's magically good and they pull off some cool upsets and we look like chumps for doing a hot board on September 2nd, right? I doubt it. I definitely wouldn't put money on it. But the schedule is hard enough that mediocrity is not possible. It'll either be really exciting or really depressing. And either way leads to a more positive future.
Yeah. Because even if we're wrong and they say they pull out a 7 and 5 and 8 for a year, you don't get to 7 or 8 wins if you don't beat like Florida
Good
State on the
team.
road or Texas on the road or Ole Miss at home or Tennessee on the road. Like there's no way you can just beat the bad teams on your schedule and get to 7 and 8 wins with how Florida this schedule is. So I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying if it were, the route would certainly be, wow, you got some exciting wins that actually shows promise for Florida football going forward. And then there's the other case where it is so hard, where you don't beat in these teams because it is so difficult, and the team is like 3-9, and a change has to be made. Um, so as you said, if the former happens and they're actually exciting, I'll gladly be wrong. I mean, I don't want to be right that Florida football is like in the worst spot it's ever been. That just kind of seems how it is. But if we're dead wrong about this and Billy Napier actually turns out to be the guy, I'll eat my words. I'll fine. Okay, cool. I was wrong in Florida
There's
and the
nothing I'd
team I enjoy watching and the school I went to is actually good at football. That's great.
there's nothing I'd more happily be wrong about than Billy Napier's cooked and Florida's cooked. But it has never felt worse, and I'm not sure how it gets better. But hey, man, maybe it was just a slow week one. Maybe that's the fire they needed.
Look, all I'm gonna say is Billy Napier's got he's got Florida fans in front of a damn Denny's. Um, to quote a very awesome video I watched on Twitter the other day. He's got fans in front of Denny's, man. We got Waffle House, we got IHOP in Gainesville, and my man is in front of a Denny's. And that's just not a good spot to be in. That's all I'll say. So the last thing I'll say, not about Florida football, because we've talked a lot about them, is just the last little note. The other teams we watch are good. Notre Dame, massive win against Texas A&M. Would you like to
Back.
say anything
Never
about
been
that?
more back.
Bradley
Like
Leonard is a dude.
he's a hooper. He's a certified hooper. Um, the defense, I was talking about Florida has like no juice defensively. Everyone's so slow. Um, Notre Dame right now looks like Florida used to look defensively, which is crazy to think. I never thought I'd see something like that, but that defense is so freaking fast and so aggressive and has so many good playmaking defensive backs. It's kind of disgusting.
That's my kind of
So,
ball, man.
dude,
That's
it's
my kind of
awesome.
ball. And Cal, it looked a little concerning against UC Davis. Pulled out a 31-13 win. My guy Fernando Mendoza is the truth.
Oh, he's the guy, huh? No Chandler Rogers.
He didn't look very good week one, I can't lie. But yeah, Nando, they're gonna upset Auburn week two, I believe. They're gonna
Gosh,
go into
that'd
Auburn,
be.
they're gonna go into
I need
Jordan
it.
Hare, and Jaden Knott's gonna run for 200 yards. So yeah, that'll close it out. We've spent a very long time just being very distraught about Florida football. And we're not in front of a Denny's, but maybe after a week two upset loss to Samford, we will be. So yeah. Topher, thank you for joining me and talking about Florida football and sharing our despair about this program. Uh, would you like to plug anything?
Uh, no, nothing going on.
Let's
Someday
go.
something will be going on.
Well, you could still follow his Twitter for tweets about lacrosse and also tweets about Florida's despair, such as mine. So what's your handle? Is it just Topher Adams?
Yeah, there's an underscore in between.
Yes. You can follow me at Jackson Reyes. So thank you. I don't know if we'll do this again. If Florida keeps losing, maybe we will. Maybe we'll just keep being more sad as the program goes on. We'll see. But yeah, thank you for listening. This has been Florida Despair Hour with Jackson and Topher.